Good everything, everybody.
Hey,
Everybody, clap your hands. Yes. How are you? How are you? How are you? What's good, Dr. Carr?
doing good, doing good. How you feeling, Prof?
This I hate this time of year.
Do you?
I do. I do.
Why?
Well, first of all, and I know you can relate to this. My dad's not here,
Yeah.
and a lot of gatherings centered around him. So,
Mm.
that's so it's that like right down to who cuts the turkey, like they.
Oh yeah.
So it's just that. I mean, he
Mm.
was he was like the master storyteller and just hilarious, funniest person I ever knew in my life. Just
Oh my goodness.
hilarious. So it's just like it's a reminder. There's a big gaping hole. So then
Yeah.
there's that, and then you got to navigate people you don't really like. So I avoided it. Be honest, the pandemic was like, oh, ain't got to be around nobody.
Right. Right.
But now there's no excuse. So
No
there's
excuse, huh? You
wow.
gotta get back in rotation.
Yep. So there's that.
Oh, you're better than I am.
Okay, what you doing?
Oh, I'm gonna sit still.
Okay.
I have been.
I want to do that.
Well, I mean, well, but you don't get a chance. Yeah, and I don't. This past week has been intense, so I haven't spent. I mean, this is the time when I get to spend time. So even yesterday was the last day of class before travel. So I taught my classes and then just kind of stayed on campus for a minute, kind of walking as the sun went down,
Mm,
and it's the most peaceful day of the academic year for me because everybody is gone. And unlike the end of the spring semester when there's all this graduation, it's a calm.
mm,
And in that moment, I kind of just walk around a little bit and remember what was, because that has been destroyed.
mm,
What was has been destroyed, thoroughly destroyed by a lack of institutional memory. And this isn't unique to Howard University. I think this is the case with many HBCUs. But in that moment, I can kind of walk around with the ghosts. And so
mm,
reminder of what has to be done. And this previous week has been very heavy with memory and a lot of juxtaposition, some of which I'll mention in passing today. And a week ago today, we were in Minor Hall. A lot of folks came from Nubia, a lot of folks from the DC public schools, a lot of students who came, the faculty, again, at the School of Education at Howard came. And so I was still sitting with that, what happened in Philadelphia, coming back to DC for the African Student Association event Saturday night, all that. So it just took me a minute. And then today, of course, we had the job, thanks to you, Lamont, and I, in the morning, and then came on through. And then I went over to Union Station, as I said I was going to do. I mentioned that this morning, just to sit and watch people go. This is the biggest, obviously, people say this is, it's the biggest travel day of the year. Yeah, but just like when you go to vote, there is something underneath that. All these people are in motion for one purpose, but it isn't a civic purpose. This is as close as this godforsaken settler colony gets to a common purpose that is absolutely underneath it, both common to the human spirit to convene, to be in family, to be in community, and so different from life to life that the dissonance, I just sit in that. So I sat there for about 2 hours.
listen, I mean, I just was sharing today that it was Lincoln who first introduced Thanksgiving, and then for like till the 1940s, I think it became a national holiday or real holiday in the 1940s, 1941. But the South thought of it as like, oh, this is some y'all on some BS. We're not doing so. The South wasn't trying to celebrate at all. And then 20 years ago or so, we started recognizing it. I was sharing that a friend of mine would call me every Thanksgiving and say Happy Indian Annihilation Day. Like, that's very much, sir. That's very much. But then we really started leaning into the decimation of the indigenous people because we have no memory.
That's right.
And so now people don't celebrate it the same way or whatever. I call it Thanksgiving or
Uh-huh.
Friendsgiving, because we have, as we always do, we make chitlins taste good.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do, which is part of our problem
Shout out to my
because
chitlins.
it doesn't mask the it doesn't mask the reality that it's poison.
Correct.
But when we make stuff good, taste good, we end up eating our own death. So I mean, but yeah, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because yeah, Lincoln, looking at the U.S. presidents in this U.S. social structure, Lincoln certainly, I think, stands out. I think we all would acknowledge that in terms of his determination to almost single-handedly will a national identity. And of course, that's not possible, and he failed, and in fact, paid for it in part with his life. But the whole idea of creating something that harkened back in the myth making to, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tomorrow, Lamont and I, when we go on.
Y'all gonna be live?
Well, we know we already put that in the can, so it'll be live to everybody. It'll be new, yeah, of course. If it was up to me, sure, I'll go in the studio, but everybody's gone, so I mean, I'll be very happy to go. But because part of the way I move through the world is I'm not going to recognize any of these things because somebody has to keep the light on. And I'm not alone in that, but I do think that there are moments when we have to come out of our governance formation and remind ourselves that this can't be redeemed, and you can't compromise on moments. You don't have to be a bore about it. You don't have to be angry about it or insistent about it. It's little quiet ways to do those things. Remember when we read the Kipunumuk, the so-called Thanksgiving, the holiday story, Daniel Greendeer.
It took me 4 weeks to get it. That thing, after you talked about it, that thing was sold out. I said, Dr. Carr.
Well, that's what you do. That you did. We're gonna try to talk to Danielle Greendeer, but we couldn't get her in time. But at the end of that children's book, she talks about setting aside a spirit plate, an ancestor plate, and I have friends. I think about my friend Dr. Afia Zakia, Sister Afia, who would always make an ancestor plate. For me, displacing these things are like the equivalent of an ancestor plate, because our ancestors, as you said, as we'll talk about in a minute, in one of the Thanksgiving conversations we had, it was 142. You raised the phrase center the before, and in a country in motion. When we think about something like this, and of course here I kept this one out of storage. There's certain things I keep. This is Danielle Greendeer, Anthony Perry, and Alexis Bunton's children's book, Kipunumuk, Wiachamun's Thanksgiving story, where she tells a story through the animals and the plants who see these humans come for centuries, for thousands of years. These humans here, who are now referred to as Native Americans, which in many ways is an insult, I think, to them. They were not Americans. They were humans who lived on a continent that ended up being nicknamed for a hemisphere, for America Vespucci. But when you think about the people who were here, the Wampanoag, the first peoples, that means people of the first light. She tells the story through the animals and the plants who make a decision collectively, the plants and then the animals, who then tell the humans to not allow those people who came from across the water to starve. They make a decision out of respect for life and out of a fear that life was being harmed, as half the people in the so-called Massachusetts Bay Colony starved in that first winter of 1620, from 1620 to 1621, when you have the first gathering for a meal. And I wonder if those animals and plants, had they looked forward a little bit, had they not been better off allowing them to starve. These religious zealots that children were raised to call pioneers, and people trying to escape religious persecution, even as they came over here and imposed it on everyone else, which shortly after the first meal, they began to, because that's what they do, keep records. They began to write. And so what we have as a concept of Thanksgiving, as we talked about, we won't talk about it tonight, because of this remarkable document that's been produced in collaboration and using the technology. Again, everyone who worked on it, deeply grateful, because one of the things I'm going to do is spend some time, more time. I've been spending time with it, but more time over this little moment of pause with the document that has been generated that goes through the archive of In Class and begins to give some contour to where you can go in and be in conversation with the living links to the videos, to the In Class conversations, with the compendium of things, everything that has been mentioned, everything, complete with a citation. As I said, some 1,600, just shy of 1,600 pages, just a compendium, not even a major description, just tags and a compendium, which is remarkable. So it was nothing for me now to enter that document and be reminded of not only the vast archive generally, but it was number 142. The title of our 142nd convening and session, weekly session, is Irene Carr's Celebration Bowl and the Real Meaning of Thanksgiving. And that's where, Prof, you evoked the reality that there was a before, center the before. And that is a key phrase, center the before. This is what Lincoln does by reaching back past the Civil War, past the conflicts of the mid-19th century United States, to give energy again to something that first saw elevation into a countrywide ritual during George Washington's time, during the period of the Continental Congress that declared that there should be a ritual of Thanksgiving, which would fold in that first meal and fold in those rituals with a philosophy of settler colonialism. In other words, the first celebration, so to speak, was also to include the celebration for battleground victories, not the victories of Africans against those who oppressed, or the victories of the indigenous people against those who invaded, but the victories of the children of the settlers, the English settlers, against their parents, the so-called Revolutionary War. And so as we think about this, and again, we won't talk about it at length because they say you covered it today and we covered it a couple of years ago, and we came back and covered it again in 193, session 193, when we learn the education of Black people, which, because of that conversation, our brother Sharif El-Mekki and the folk, as I mentioned last Saturday at the Black Male Educator Convening, chose to use that as the theme that opened up the convening of several thousand educators, most of them men of African descent, primarily, overwhelmingly, not exclusively, back in Philadelphia. We did that in 193. And then the following week, why are we thankful? So if you want to go back into the archive now and sit with us, that is the week we told the story of the Macy's parade. Remember last year, Alabama A&M was in the parade. We talked about that. There's footage from that. You look in the searchable document, the archive, you can see how we wove that in brilliantly. The folks who worked on this, between that and the AI being developed, you can see timestamps that literally go through each of our sessions and stop every minute or two, or a few minutes, or clusters of minutes, to let you know with the hot link where we talk about certain things. So you have to balance that. Of course, there's this vast archive, but the archive remains mute. The archive remains mute without engaging it. So not only is it not unusual, it is to be expected. Anyone who is taught, certainly, and I experience it every day I teach, and happened again this week. I've gone through something 50 times and a little hand shows up. Yes. So when is such and such due? Literally, I just came out of my mouth. In fact, how many instances when I was saying it and then the hand go? So Wednesday, so now what I've taken to doing is saying, well, let me test our hearing ability. I won't answer that. Let's get somebody else. What do you say? And then they repeat it. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Listen, it's the more substantive equivalent of don't boo, vote. No, just listen. Just listen. Instead of anticipating what you're about to say and waiting for somebody else's voice to still, just listen. It'll come. Well, the archive that we have in class, this archive that is now inching toward 5 years, which is just stunning to me. This download, I think about the great Anderson Thompson in Chicago, and how the work that we did not do enough of, I used to refer to as helping him download his mental computer. In other words, download it all. Well, this living document is a download. Everything I'm saying now becomes part of a literal transcript, becomes part of an archive and a searchable archive. And with a couple of keystrokes, you can go to section 142 and see in the timestamps where we talk about what you talked about, Prof, centering before, where we read the Kipunumuk book, where we talked about the Bayou Classic, which is coming up since 1974. The Bayou Classic has been mounted. So 74, 84, 94, 04, 14, 24, 50-year anniversary. We talked about Thomas Ailo's book, Bayou Classic, the Grambling Southern Football Rivalry, which was published in 2010 by Louisiana State University Press, which I find offensive. After all, is there no Southern University Press, no Grambling State University Press? No. And LSU, it's not your job. Am I glad that there is a text? Sure. Are we in Thomas Ailo and all the folks who helped him's debt? Absolutely. Should it be LSU Press? Absolutely not. But we are still in our infancy in some ways in understanding the importance of institutions, not just to preserve things, not just to convene, but to remember, which allows us to have the momentum of memory. All that in 142. We discussed the Bayou Classic again in session 145, which was entitled Celebration Bowl and the Meanings of These Gatherings, where we went through the major classics. We are in classic seasons. So many Negroes going to descend on New Orleans have already started. We talked about it this morning, Lamont and I. Somebody called in. They said, Louisiana. We started. Hey, man, you going to the Bayou Classic? Me and my wife on the way down there tomorrow. Here we go. Beautiful convening. Thousands there in what used to be known as the Superdome. When we were there back in March for the National Association of Black Social Workers, we were staying in the shadow of the Superdome and just walking around New Orleans, humming to myself, Louis Armstrong the whole time. Just being reminded of that space and thinking about, do you know what it means do you know what it means to miss New Orleans? But thinking about the fact that that city is going to be packed with our people on this weekend is a ritual. But in 145, we talked about the meanings of those gatherings because we're in that corridor now. The Mid-Eastern Atlantic Conference his champion been crowned. I think it's going to South Carolina State Bulldogs are lined up, and the Southwestern Athletic Conference, their champion, are going to meet up in Atlanta early next month, and the Celebration Bowl. And we talked about all those bowls and the rivalries in the context of session 145. And then we came back 30 weeks later with Why Are We Thankful? And talked about the story of the Macy's parade. Again, this is just by way of marking for the archive because repetition is the key in education. People talk about unlinking critical thinking skills, absolutely important. People talk about giving voice and hearing and listening to next generations as they stretch out, absolutely. Artificial intelligence and everything from Chat GPT to the various other forms of translating speech to text and everything else is literally obliterating our capacity to use institutions to develop the capacity to be still. Haile Gerima says something all the time. He says, the music is in the silence. And in that silence, which I'm looking forward to spending the next few days in as much silence as I can muster and gather, you can begin to hear those things. Sejem, as the ancient Egyptians would say, listen. Footnote, if you haven't yet seen session 101 of the Men of Nature class with Mario Beatty, you really owe it to yourself. It will fortify us all, I think, as we move into this next calendar year. But the ancient Egyptians' concept of Medu, speech, of Sejem, listen, it is at the center of it. And we are facing institutions now. The technology is threatening to wipe out that capacity to listen because it becomes a simple exercise of telling the machine what you want and expecting what you got back is what you were looking for, but you didn't even think about it. It's happening so quickly. So we talked in 194. We asked the question, why are we thankful? And we, talked about these HBCU bands traveling to New York City. Belle Biv DeVoe. Belle Biv DeVoe performed at the last year's Macy's parade. Imagine that, coming down the street and Broadway, and raising the declaration, the declarative assertion, the warning: never trust a big butt, and a smile. But as the balloons float ahead, and as Klaus becomes the last person in line, waving bye, except not BYE, BUY, and opens up the gate to the buying season, Black Friday, which started apparently in August, if you can trust the machines. But at any rate, certainly over the last week or two, it seems like Jeff Bezos and his people have started Black Friday on last Monday, or even before Black Friday week. And we know that there's Small Business Saturday. So for those of you looking for gear, we got the Knarrative stuff, there's all kind of things. Go spend some money with a Black-owned business. One of those over 300 bookstores that we have in the compendium on Knarrative, where you can look and find where your closest bookstore is. This is the 100th anniversary of the Macy's Parade. Something we couldn't say last year. So when you're going back in the archive and looking at session 194 to get more of the detail about how this all started as a marketing thing, a century ago in the mid 1920s, even as you say, Prof, we're in the shadow now of the so-called Thanksgiving ritual being codified into a countrywide ritual as the struggle continued, as you say, on a regional basis, to see it really hit the ground in the waning days, kind of the middle to waning days of the Great Depression, when Franklin Roosevelt declared that it should be the fourth Thursday of the month of November. And then there ended up being a couple of fifth Thursdays in the month of November during Roosevelt's term. And you see that same cold Civil War heat up again when some of the states, the southern states that didn't like Roosevelt, decided they were going to celebrate it on the fourth Thursday anyway. Damn what the president says. So even in that, you see the fragile thing that binds together Lincoln's mystic chords of memory. But in 1924, R.H. Macy, Gimbel's, the department store wars in Philadelphia, Wanamaker, which you all may or may not know, and I've talked about that before. That's in the archive, the first major department store in the United States. Philadelphia, also the home of the birth of Mother's Day. There are signs in downtown Philadelphia, a stone's throw where we had the Black Male Educator convening, which marked that history, again, trying to create national identity. Well, in the case of Macy, you have these Europeans who are just fighting their way into whiteness, who have come from places in Europe, Southern Europeans, Italians, and Spanish, other people coming in, Central Europeans, and some of them worked in his store and his flagship store there at 34th and 7th Avenue. And what you then see is that they don't celebrate Thanksgiving where they're from. Thanksgiving is a uniquely American settler colonial nationalist project, which is why you can get a great meal on Thanksgiving if you don't feel like cooking and you're by yourself, or you're going to take the family. Just go to the Chinese restaurant, go to the Indian restaurant, go to these places which don't put themselves in the black on Thanksgiving, but certainly make a lot of money, because these people don't come from places where that settler colonial ritual is fused with the very human need to be in community, to create something that on the calendar year is the most unique of the European ritual holidays, so-called Thanksgiving. I would point everybody to our brother and now ancestor, who is Shakamusa Barashango. Barashango, I usually keep Barashango somewhere close. Let me see. I don't see him, and I'm not going to look for him. I'll just refer, because you can go to the archive. We've talked about Ishakamusa Barashango many times. African people and European holidays, a mental genocide. So, but they didn't call the first parade at Macy's, which included employees, many of them in the dress of their home countries. They ain't doing anything else on this day. The store is closed, but they got dressed and paraded from 145th Street in Harlem. Isn't that interesting? All the way down to 34th Street. And it was a big display, festive. Balloons were introduced 3 years later, 1927. The first balloons, for a few years, they would release the big balloon and it would just float away. And wherever it landed, they had a message in the balloon, and whoever retrieved the message could bring it back to Macy's and get a prize. But at any rate, That was a commercial. 250,000 people watched their first parade a century ago this year. But it was a big commercial. Again, Klaus is at the end saying, bye, bye. Now come on in here. And as I've told you all many times, and I won't belabor the point today, we're going to kind of keep this tight tonight. Whenever I have been close to New York, I brought my mom up there one time. My whole family, niece, brother, we all, they came to Philly. I was living in Philly, and then we all went to the Macy's parade. There's a beautiful picture somewhere on one of these cameras. Well, that, little electronic cameras before the phones could take pictures. My mom standing with two sisters from the New York Police Department, two black women who had to work that day with their braids braided up underneath their police caps. And they just smiling. My mom is smiling. My little niece, Jamoke, she's a little girl at the time, smiling. I took a picture of these sisters smiling there because they had to work the Macy's parade. But I go to the Macy's parade, or I've gone in prior years. Maybe I'll go tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. But for those of you watching this on a regular Saturday, this would have already happened. So we post this on the YouTube side. Maybe I'll get in the chat a little bit and on Saturday as people are watching. But I remember thinking one time early on, this would have been in the late 90s. I went to the Macy's parade when I was living in Philly, maybe 96, 97. Standing there and watching what I knew in my head in terms of the history, but seeing it in real time is quite different. Any of y'all ever been to the Macy's parade understand it's one big ass commercial. That's what it is. When you look at the Macy's parade this year, and I think I might be able to pull this up, I'm not sure. Yeah, there are no HBCU bands this year. There are only, let's see, let me see if I can find, yep, 22 balloons. So Snoopy gonna be there, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Minnie Mouse, Goku, Kung Fu Panda, Ronald McDonald, look at that, Pillsbury Doughboy, of course, Smokey the Bear, who's an anachronism, but for old time's sake, Stuart the Minion, Tiptoe, SpongeBob, 7 balloonicles is what they're calling them. These are smaller balloons. Go Bowling, Lox and Java Tricaloon, Nutcracker, Mouse King, Baby Dinos, 34 floats. Everything from the Big Red Shoe Car to the Colossal Wave of Wonder, Fantasy Chocolate Factory. There's our friend Dora, the Fantastical Rainforest. Hold on, let me go back and look at the balloons. Where's the Explorer? Oh, bienvenidos. They ain't got no Big Dora this year. Look at that. She done been demoted to a float. My God, the gift of freedom with a Statue of Liberty arm with the torch. Isn't this interesting? Again, this is America. Boy, SpongeBob, 11 marching bands, no HBCUs, so ain't no need in mentioning any of them. 28 performers, Chloe, Coco Jones, I'm looking at the black vote. Jennifer Hudson, our sister's going to be there. Liza Colon Zayas is going to be the Temptations. And T-Pain, interesting. What will he perform? War and Treaty, Walker Hayes, 28 Clown Crews. The crew is a thing when you think about New Orleans and the Zulus and the African crews down there. But I don't see none of the Zulus here. I see the Funny Furry Clowns, Half-Baked Holiday Sweets, Nutty Cracker Ballet Clowns, Keystone Cops, Photographer Clowns, and 11 performance groups, including the Indigenous Enterprise, River Dance, 30, the New Generation, Spirit of America Cheer, La Fuerza Dance Company. So at any rate, and it's always interesting because when you see they have incorporated Indigenous folk, because I remember going to the Macy's parade and seeing some Indigenous folk coming in, opening up the parade. So as you say, Prof, there is this constant shifting because not only is this a criminal enterprise, but it's one that has been contested from the very beginning. We didn't take it lying down. So as Langston Hughes says, as we talked about, America never was America to me, but this I vow, America will be. I am thinking more along the lines of quitting America, not packing up and leaving, although that's always a possibility to go back and forth, not giving up the passport, but you can't stop me. Sorry, Bubblehead Stephen Miller. Let's dance when 2025 starts. You're going to find out just how impossible some of your harebrained schemes hatched in the middle of the night as you contemplated your own deep insecurities and now try to project them on the rest of us. Not going to work. But quitting America more along the lines of what Randall Robinson talked about, which we'll come to in a moment. So yeah, if you want to go back to 194, we talk more about the Macy's parade and what that means and how, as I said, and I'll say now very quickly, when you go to the actual parade, and I like to go and get right as close to the corner of 34th and 7th as I can, right there in front of the building, and you see Al Roker and them is sitting there with the Macy's with the outfit for NBC, something that before technology exploded, all the legacy media stuff became must-see TV for people at the Macy's parades. Children, we watch it in Nashville, watch it on little TV, you know, and this was a thing people gathered around. The day, in fact, convened around a cultural meaning making and a movement and memory that was very much out of the social structure. So if you got 4 channels, if you include PBS, you turn on the NBC. You started the morning with the Macy's parade. You're around the house. The cooking is going on. The people are arriving. And then, of course, the ubiquitous phrase, the 3-word phrase, the game's on, the game's on, the game's on. I'm going to be watching 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour of any football game. But that was a ritual. Cowboys and Indians. I mean, again, the whole echo through the echo chamber and the momentum of settler colonial memory. We're going to have Cowboys versus Indians. And of course, the Detroit Lions began kind of some of that. And the irony, here's an irony. Remember, we talked about Jim Thorpe, Carlisle Indians. The Carlisle team, college football, was bigger than in the late 19th, early 20th century. Pop Warner, that's what Pop Warner was, right? When we get Pop Warner football. But it was indigenous people at one of them damn native schools that did so much damage to the indigenous people. It was their football team that ushered into the consciousness what eventually exploded in the 1920s with the nascent National Football League, the idea of a football game on Thanksgiving. It was the literal Indians. You can't make this stuff up, friends. You want to know why I don't deal with it? Please understand, somebody got to keep the lights on. So, I mean, the whole momentum of it, and then to this day, Cowboys and Indians fighting on so-called Thanksgiving. And at a time when all you had was television and each other, then this was the spine that linked the whole country together. Now, of course, you have basketball and all kind of other things. But, you know, when you think about this ritual of convening, at its peak, dozens of millions, 50 million, 60 million people tuned in. At some point tomorrow, either live or replayed or a couple of minutes, you'll see it on television, but never again will you see what I got a chance to witness, which is when you're standing there, you see them commenting, you see them talking, you see the cameras, and they have the cameras on risers, the television network cameras. They go up, and you know when they're going live because the producer is saying live in 3, 2, 1. We're back, the Macy's parade, and you see who gets broadcast to the world and who doesn't. Of those marching bands, everybody don't get seen. Why? Because they got to make decisions, because they're selling on television what the balloons are representing. And I'm standing there watching children look at the balloons and narrate to their parents what they want for Christmas, because they know the balloons. Here come Clifford the big red dog. I want to go, oh, they got 58 million of them toys in that building right there. And here's this lady standing here looking like, my God, I got to buy this big ass. What is that? Oh, that's the comfy couch. I mean, the kids know all of the stuff. Why? Because the television is their babysitter, and the parents now got to go in their pockets and go into debt, some of them. But then you see the cameras go down just as this band that raised all this money from North Dakota to get there comes and hits the corner and goes around. But they ain't on television. Then the camera goes back up. Oh, and here comes singing stars. Wow. And of course, they put a few in for human interest. But it's interesting to see it narrated, because this is cultural meaning making. Again, things we talked about in a different way in session 194. But I'm spending these days at work, contemplating, planning, silence and reflection, kind of girding loins. After all, I am a classroom teacher, and I'm very aware that repetition is the key to this. We have this vast archive. It's not going to do nothing but get deeper and richer. And as we are doing that now, to make connections, to refer back, to have people sit, because people rarely listen the first time. People rarely listen the second, third, 50th, or 100th time. People listen when they're ready to listen. And this isn't a one-way conversation, as we know in office hours. In a moment, I'm going to evoke our brother Marlon, who in office hours on Monday night really gave us all something to think about. And I want to thank him, because it sent me back to the archive and for something else that I had here with me. And I'll mention that in a minute. But I'm spending this time thinking about a lot of things. As I said last Saturday, the past week was intense. The 45th Charles Thompson lecture, something that I'm still sitting very deliberately with, trying to now have some time to think about it. Again, my friends at the School of Education, I'm still, y'all invite me to do that. I'm still deeply humbled by that. Past lecturers included Sister Gloria Latson Billings, who I saw actually at the Black Male Educator convening. And she said, "Oh, yeah, I gave the Thompson lecture." I said, "I know, I watched." My man, Martin Lamont Hill, who was there at the Black Male Educator convening last year, but wasn't there this year. So I didn't get a chance to talk with him face to face. Mark gave that talk, and he spoke for maybe an hour and then took questions for another 30 minutes. I had about 40 minutes. They were on a tight schedule. And I wish I had more because I had a lot more to say. But in that 40 minutes, I hope I was effective enough in putting some markers down. Beginning with the building we were in, I was talking to my man, Brad Grant, who is a master architect, a master teacher, and associate dean at the Howard University School of Architecture, has trained a whole lot of Black architects. And he said, "Thank you, man, for Wednesday night. Not only did we all get a chance to be together, but I got a chance to get in the minor building," because he's an architect. And Brad was walking me through how this building, which began life, foundation dug in 1913, and they finished in 1914, how this over a century old building, it has these beautiful, huge windows throughout the structure. Massive building with these massive windows all throughout the structure. He said, of course, this was before you had central heating like we have today. And so those windows were served the purpose of not only letting sunlight in, but generating some light and heat from the sun in the winter months. It's fascinating to hear him talk about the architecture of this building. And so anyway, we were talking about that in the waning moments of Tuesday, as we closed up shop for the week and in many ways for the semester, although we got another week to go, a couple of weeks of exams. But thinking about this past week has been intense because, of course, I rushed from Wednesday to Philadelphia for the Black Male Educator convening, which we talked about last Saturday. And there's only one or two things I want to say about that now, because they happened after we had our session Saturday morning. And a lot of Nubians, good to see y'all who were there in class Saturday with us. And then I saw in person a couple of hours later in the sessions. And then, of course, I rushed from Philadelphia to make it back because I had the honor of being the faculty advisor for the Howard University African Students Association, which I take as a signal responsibility, because these young people are either from the continent of Africa or their parents from the continent of Africa, or maybe their grandparents, but usually first or second generation continental African students. And hundreds of them descended upon the Howard Student Center on Saturday night for their annual Mr. and Miss Africa pageant. It's the biggest event of the year for the African Students Association. And as their faculty advisor, it's my responsibility to be there. So I left Philadelphia a little early, which is, always sad for me because that's my adopted hometown. I like to spend some more time there. I did get a chance to go by the one bookstore. Well, I won't get into that. But getting back to Philly, I'm getting back to DC. I saw some things that I have to sit with now. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But one thing I want to mention from Saturday that I didn't get a chance to mention Saturday morning because it hadn't happened yet. I rushed down to the plenary and called our brother, Prof. Hunter Mike Harriet. Mike Harriet was he was in conversation there when I walked into the ballroom. I missed my sister, Njamile Anderson, who had performed her daughter, that's like my daughter as well, Anshere Hines, one of our stalwarts who along with Stephanie Tisdale, and has kept the Freedom School light on in terms of the intellectual focus. The intellectual work is at the center of the Freedom School movement. If it ain't got a deep book in it and deep study, it's not Freedom Schools. I don't care how many bells and whistles, where is the text and where is the community engaging the text? If it's not that, it's not Freedom School. I don't want to hear it, or I do want to hear it. Let's talk. But at any rate, missed that by that much. But when I came in, Mike was talking. And Mike was in conversation and with Brother Hayes, Dr. Hayes, who is the principal and CEO of Philadelphia Boys Latin. And as I mentioned on Saturday, I'm not a fan of young children of African descent learning Latin before they learn Meta Nature. I'm not saying don't learn Latin, but don't reinforce the idea that somehow that is a standard of excellence that transcends your ancestors, because after all, we have to begin with the beginning And after all, as you said, Prof, in session 142, we have to center the before. We have to do that. And it was on full display in what I'm about to mention. There was a panel right after Mike's opening plenary conversation, which, by the way, he didn't see me because I came in after the thing had started, and I came up the side. There are thousands of people in this massive convening hall there in downtown Philadelphia, across the street from the convention center at the Lowe's Hotel. So I came up the side. I like to come up the side, and it was dark, and I sat there. So I like to listen, you know, because if I'm going to be able to listen instead of be talking and engaging, I got to come in and be quiet. I'm coming in some. And he's talking about how we create and use technology to educate. Mike, with his with his characteristic wit, intelligence, and knows how to communicate and give and takes. He's sitting there with Dr. Jones, and he talks about, he says, this thing I'm trying to build online, and he's talking about that. And I've heard you talk a little bit about that too, Prof, the thing that you all have been talking about. And then he says, Karen Hunter and Greg Carr and the people at Knarrative, they have a global classroom, and then you hear all these people start clapping. I realized all these people here are in this. There are thousands of people in this room, and this isn't something that is particular to a region. It ain't DC, it ain't Philly, it ain't New York, it ain't Jersey, it ain't just Atlanta, it ain't just LA, it ain't just Cape Town, South Africa, or Johannesburg, South Africa, or KwaZulu-Natal, it isn't just England, it isn't just Nigeria. It is truly global. And it's very sobering to hear over and over again. By the way, Dan Black's new book is about to drop. I know y'all going to talk about it, Prof. This isn't the Black Bible. This is not the next iteration, next session, the next step in the coming series, because he's got one of those coming. This is a sequel to Listen to the Lambs. It's out next month. I think he's got some tour dates already in place, so I'll keep an eye out for that. Somebody may be in the chat right now in Nubia putting those dates in. I got to pull up the app so I can see. But yeah, Mike talked about these platforms, and that is really real. This is how we are jailbreaking the Black University. It's jailbroken, as I mentioned on Wednesday night. A lot for me to sit with now over this coming few days and think about and put together in my mind as I enter this next season. Because between now, and I said this on Sirius this morning with Lamont, between now and Kwanzaa, a priority for me is, and this is spurred in part by Mario's talk, is thinking about and also discussing now in public with us how to really enter 2025 not only prepared to fight, but prepared to be on our own terms. And for me, that requires quitting America and building within ourselves. By quitting America, I mean withdrawing from the noise of rhetoric. We know what this fool is going to do, but rather entering a conversation with ourselves that will fortify us. And some of that has been, I've been thinking about it all along. I've been talking about this the last couple of weeks, and we've been talking about it since the election, really. But a laser focus that I was reminded of on Monday night in Nubia, when Brother Marlon Ashby, studying now for his, mid-year examinations, first year of law school down there at Thurgood Marshall, Texas Southern School of Law, introduced a book in response to Brother Gilbert, who had asked about to come in first on Monday night in office hours, an hour or two, and asked, what are some books? Now, again, what are some books? Because Gilbert's he's a new subscriber in the Knarrative and new in the Nubia. So rather than point to the archive and say, go back through the archive, which I never want to do because I'm a teacher, I know. And there's always somebody new or somebody new to the space. I mentioned a couple of books, Manisha Sinha's book, The Rise and Fall of the Second Republic, which is on Reconstruction. The more recent book, of course, Lerone Bennett Jr.'s Black Power USA, which I still think in terms of narrative is in many ways the gold standard of how we think about the 19th century. But Marlon came in and mentioned a book, which I had in the other room, didn't get up to get. This is Alden Morris's excellent book, a standard called The Origins of the Civil Rights Movement, Black Communities Organizing for Change. I'll come back to that in a minute. But that helped me sharpen where I think I want to go in terms of thinking about collectively how we move forward and transcend and frankly impose our will, not as an act of violence, but as an act of centering our common humanity, centering ourselves and doing that to center our common humanity. But as I said, I left Saturday morning, went to the session, saw Mike, and then right after they had a panel to discuss teaching and learning. And I thought it was very interesting. Joyce Abbott, my friend Joyce Abbott, of course, the sister for whom Abbott Elementary is named because one of her students grew up and became a television writer and a television star. And, so to see Quinta Brunson's teacher again, I see her at least once a year at the convening. She has some very remarkable things to say, first in conversation on a panel and then on the plenary. And again, shout out to our sister, Laree Daniel Favors. So good to see Laree sat in the panel she was in, as I talked about that on Saturday. But this is Joyce Abbott and Emir Williams, one of our young brothers who came through the Freedom School Literacy Academy iteration of Freedom Schools in Philadelphia, who is now a classroom teacher of his own on his own right. And it was very interesting because there was also a brother who I want to mention now, Al Hassan Suso. And they talk about him Saturday because this plenary hadn't happened yet. I encourage everybody to look him up. Alhassan, Al Hassan. Last name Suso, Susso. He won New York State Teacher of the Year a little while back. He is, as he described himself, 13th generation griot. He called himself a griot, which after the session, while everybody was convening around all the other folks, and he was in, I waited till things kind of calmed down, and I went up to him and we talked a little bit and exchanged, got his information. I said, so you all call it griot in Gambia? Do you use the word jolly? Because he said, oh, yes, I could have said that, jolly. I said, is it translated as blood? He said, yeah, and we talked about that. 13th generation, friends. And while everybody was talking about teaching methods and loving the children, he centered community in the stories. He said the center of education is knowing who people are. It was absolutely governance logic. And it was movement and memory from someone who is 13th generation. And I said, are you related to the Kaitas? Because, Sundiata Kaita, this is the Jollies. This is the old Mali, right? The Mali so-called empire. And he says, well, the Susos came from the Kaitas. I said, man, come on, brother. We got to talk. Because what he talked about was this brother teaching now middle school. When he got into this classroom, I think it's the Bronx he's in, he was confronted with the fact that there's chronic absenteeism, chronic lateness, students not showing up to class, to school, students coming very late. And he asked if he could start a before school program, not an after school program for these two, a before. So the principal was like, dude, did you hear me? They don't come at all and they don't come on time. How you going to start school an hour early? He said, let me try it. Long story short, through techniques you can imagine, we maybe talk about this a little bit more on Monday night because we're going to keep this kind of short today. People are eating, food is digesting. If you're watching this on the weekend or next week, you're still recovering. Just know that what he talked about, how he did this, centered the students. They come, I want to know who you are. I want to know who your family is. I want to know. And he said, little by little, this momentum built. And then by the time he got this thing firmly established, the whole school was doing what he called the morning school, the morning academy, because not only were they coming, they had perfect attendance. And not only did they have perfect attendance, they then got engaged in the academic subject. And he said, but this is something I brought with me on that plane when I came here from the Gambia when I was a boy, because my sister had needed an operation to save her life. And we couldn't get the visa to the United States of America, which was the place that was able to do the surgery that she needed to save her life. And my sister died. And he said, I decided I'm coming to America in part because I'm not going to come to America for any sense of opportunity. No, I'm coming because I can get an education there that's going to help me do some things, because I have to make sure, and this is a literal quote from here, that my sister didn't die in vain. And that man, that African, that brother from the Gambia came here and has devoted his life to teaching young people. And he drives 2 hours a day to DeBron and 2 hours back. from upstate. Let's be very clear. It's a 4-hour commute. Do you understand? To do this work. And he's at the morning academy and he stays after school for after school component. So when I think about that, that's not sacrifice. That's investment. That is community. And people tell me all the time, we need Black teachers. This is from, of course, the Center for Black Educator Development. You can go on their website and order this if you like. I love putting this on. We need Black teachers. We need Black teachers like that. This isn't a demographic conversation. This is not a who Africans are to other people, which is just a statistic, a category, a grouping. No, what we need is the momentum of memory. We need to quit America. Quit this concept and build within ourselves. And listening to this brother, listening to Brother Al-Hassan, who then was recognized as New York, Teacher of the Year. He's written a memoir. It came out about 7 or 8 years ago. I had to go look for it because I hadn't seen this brother before. So while I'm sitting there listening to him, I'm making a note. I got to look him up. And I found the memoir and I ordered it. But he opens his memoir. He calls himself the griot's son. His father writes at the beginning of his son's memoir, I'm very proud he's part of this line. And Al-Hassan says this. Al-Hassan says, I'm not one yet. I'm not a jolly yet. But I was born into the jollies. And I aspire to be that. And so there's rules to this. We had Representative Yvette Clarke on this morning on Sirius, who is going to be the incoming chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, of course, from Brooklyn by way of Jamaica. Her mother, Una Clarke, longtime city council member in New York, and then she followed in her footsteps. Yvette did, and now she's Congresswoman Clarke, been there for then. And she was talking about how we have to think about this question of immigration, because for many years she helped chair the immigration. She actually chaired it for the Congressional Black Caucus, the immigration committee, and has worked in immigration in the broader Congress. And of course, because immigration isn't just about the folks who are in Spanish-speaking communities. You saw the tariffs that Trump is threatening. You saw Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, was like, you want to put tariffs on us? We'll slap them on you. So all you hillbillies that voted for Trump thinking he's going to save your paycheck, guess what? Them tariffs on them draws that come from Mexico and Dominican Republic, they're about to shoot through the roof at Walmart. You're welcome. But at any rate, it isn't just folks from those places. It's also places from the places that Donald Trump called S-hole countries. Those will be African people. It's also people from the Caribbean, like Shirley Chisholm, Barbados, like Yvette Clarke, Jamaica. It's all those people. And in talking about that, we were talking, and back and forth. And I said, yeah, as another son of Jamaica by way of Brooklyn would say, there's rules to this stuff. I wrote me a manual. Of course, I'm talking about Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G. There are rules, and by the rules, brother Suso is not yet a jolly, as he wasn't as of 2016 when he published his memoir. But he opens that memoir as well with a quote before he gets into his story. And the quote is this: if there is no enemy within, the enemy without can do us no harm. If there is no enemy within, then the enemy without can do us no harm. Quitting America, like Randall Robinson. We read 2 of Randall Robinson's book for Philadelphia Freedom School. We read The Debt. That was the first book I picked for Philadelphia Freedom Schools in 1999. No, 2000. Because first year the Children's Defense Fund picked the book, and it was nice, but this ain't what we talking about. We doing something different. We're going to center the text, the real text, the hardcore text, the aspirational text, the deep dive and discussion text. And then Randall Robinson came to see us, and he wrote about it in his next book called The Reckoning. You get that book, you'll see him talk about what we did that previous year in Philadelphia Freedom Schools with 200 plus students reading The Debt and peppering him with questions when he came, so much so that he said this was so inspirational. I say, brother, this is instructive. You wrote this. And then he came and saw us one other time when we read his book, An Unbroken Agony on Haiti. If we had picked a third book, it probably would have been Quitting America, because Randall Robinson said, I'm going to live with my wife Hazel in the Caribbean. I'll keep my passport. I can go back and forth, but I'm quitting America because the noise is too loud. The country is too messed up. And while I will continue, because he then served on the faculty of Pennsylvania State University School of Law as a professor, he would commute, he would go back and forth. But what he did was relocate. And I say, while I am not going to physically relocate today or tomorrow, who knows about next year, 2 years, 3 years from now, but what I'm not going to do is center my walk. And I haven't for many years, but now it's time a lot more vocal about it, because I'm not going to center it in this concept, this social structure concept. Africana studies doesn't do that. This isn't contributionist. In other words, how does the Negro fit into the story of America? No, the Negro doesn't. No, the Negro doesn't. The momentum of memory will remind us that we are human in the world and we contribute to whatever society we're in, and we're not going to fold ourselves like a Macy's parade balloon into some type of ritual that reinforces and serves something else. That is not going to happen. And in fact, that is not what has been happening, which is what Alden Morris reminds us too, as I kind of begin to bring this in for a landing today. Randall Robinson, which if you want to go into our archive, sessions 149, sessions 159, sessions 160, 161, and 181. 149 is where the extensive one, the title of that one is The Selling of Bruce's Beach, Reparations, and the True Value of Martin Luther King Day. That's where we go into a deeper dive on Randall Robinson. And of course, after his ritual that they had here, the memorial down at Shiloh Baptist Church, came back and talked about him again. So check out again, 149, 159, 160, 161, and 181. Randall Robinson, as you can see, had a deep impact on me. A good brother. Think about this in this context as we go into 2025. We're going to talk a lot more about this in the weeks to come. You know, approaching the United States of America and any society really transactionally is important. In other words, how do we think about the place we are in, the places we are in, from the center of our values? This is what Ron Walters is writing about in White Nationalism, Black Interests. He says, the interests of African people have remained remarkably consistent since we were snatched and formed into groups that we wouldn't have had to form before. Yoruba and Igbo and Hausa and Fulani and Kikongo and Mbundu, all the folks together, and then becoming Black people. But those values shine through. The momentum of that memory, those ways of knowing shine through. We see them on display. They become the anchor that I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, People's Socialist Liberation Party, I don't give a damn, Green Party. The values are what keep us going. And they come from what Alden Morris in the Origins of the Civil Rights Movement calls indigenous institutions. He calls it indigenous institutions. I'm referring to it as governance formations in our Africana Studies framework. Who are we to each other? And thank you, Marlon, because it reminded me that this is one of the first books I read in graduate school. The great James Upton, who is now an ancestor, professor at Ohio State University. This would have been the fall of 1992. What am I saying? The fall of 1990. Because Lethea Watkins and I graduated from law school in the spring of 1990. We went immediately into graduate school, having taken a couple of courses before that, sat with Manning Marable, the great Linda James Myers, while we were in law school, our third year law school. And then we entered formally in the fall of 1990. And Jimmy Upton assigned The Origins of the Civil Rights Movement, among other things. And this is an excellent book because what Alden Morris does, now a professor emeritus at Northwestern University, he interviews over 50 of the people who participated in the decade before the 1960s. This is the list, if you can see. You see those names there? You can pause here. You can pause the recording if you're looking at the recording. There are many names you'll recognize. You're going to see names on there like James Bevel, E.D. Nixon, Rosa Parks, Kelly Miller Smith out of Nashville, C.T. Vivian, Wyatt T. Walker, the recent ancestor Jim Lawson, Ralph Abernathy, Benjamin Alexander, Daisy Bates, and Ella Baker. This book is informed by the people mouth to ear who gave him a sense of, yeah, these are the names you know, but alongside those names, Julian Bond, alongside those names are the people who actually made this work. This is a book about community. It's a governance book. And so when Marlon recommended it as something, as Gilbert came in Monday night and said, give me some books, and we gave him a few books, Marlon came in and said, here's a book, because Nubia is at the center of this, but outside of Nubia, all these connections are being made. Thousands of people finding each other in conversation and then building. So there's a lot of reading groups and study groups that have been formed outside of the convenings regular in Nubia that are really doing what we wanted to do, which is spreading and thinking and branching and connecting people. So what are we going to do? Oh, it's a lot of doing. Oh, it's a lot of doing going on. Again, go devote some deep thought to that, more deep thought to that. And one of the things Alden Morris's book, Brother Marlon said Monday night, the group that I'm reading with and working with, I don't know how he's doing all this, how you doing all this studying in law school, brother, but that's really I think that's why you're doing it. All of it's reading, all of it's thinking. So it kind of enhances the study if we understand the rhythms of study. That the group told me to come in here and recommend this book because I'm talking with them while I'm in, like a lot of people in Nubia, while we're in the Mbangi on Monday. People are writing the Mbangi through their fingers, what people might call the chat. People are talking voice to voice, and so people are also talking to each other outside, and so it comes in. And by the way, I saw what you said, Dr. Delaney, Kim Delaney. I'm looking forward to coming back to Chicago maybe next February because, well, anyway, I'm not going to say much about that. I'm sitting this week with a lot of stuff. But Morris calls this indigenous institutions. He talks about the church based, which I would say ways of knowing based affiliations, SCLC and SNCC and all these other organizations. He talks about the science and technology, what we would call science and technology in our Africana studies framework, the platform as delivery system. How do you have a delivery system that's organized around structures? Septima Clark. How do you have a delivery system that advances the technology of the newspaper, print technology? And here we are in an age where people are not reading print newspapers. I am, but most people not. Cultural meaning making and movement and memory, which is where I want to kind of end. So as we think about this so-called holiday weekend, at least a weekend for a pause, we talked about the power of the pause too in previous iterations. As we see this MAGA world provocation that we're on the verge of, a new pandemic, a MAGA pandemic, you see now all of the picks for the health dimension of the federal government are either vaccine anti-vaxxers or the guy now that they want over NIH is saying, you should have let COVID just run rampant among the younger people and built up immunity. And there are people here who believe that too. But now the federal policy is going to, have that in place. As we see all that, people, Trump talking with Putin at Mar-a-Lago, calling the trade war potentially with Canada and Mexico and China. The bottom line is that this type of disruption may serve us too. In addition to the chaos, which is tragic, it can also perhaps serve to potentially unblock our own vision. The myth of the United States of America won't be able to be put back together once it's torn past a certain degree, past a tipping point. This ain't Lincoln in the 1850s and 60s talking about Thanksgiving. This ain't Roosevelt in the 1930s and them talking about Thanksgiving. This ain't Nixon and the Republicans talking about it's got to be on this week in November talking about Thanksgiving. This ain't the Pilgrims. This is not even the indigenous people. Kikunumuk. This is not just the indigenous people. This isn't just the Wahapanong. This is every human being trying to figure out how we build a better society. And when they tear it up this time, it was always fragile. It's as fragile as a child pointing at a balloon because they want a toy at the Macy's parade, while the illusion is that somehow this brings us together. It was always fragile. This isn't people in a line going to vote as their civic duty, and you get a gloss of the sense of community building, which is very powerful, but not enough ultimately to sustain the larger project. This is the myth, the disruption of that myth, potentially unblocking our vision of the reality. Because again, repetition is the key in education. Unblocking the reality. Oh, I heard it this time. What? Yeah, America never was America. And guess what? It can't ever be. Because when the America you want to be, you can stop calling it America. Why don't you call it community? And what Alden Morris is talking about in here goes against the grain of these conventional narratives that these Africans were trying to somehow live up to the great dream of the United States. Ain't got nothing to do with that myth, with Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson. No, it ain't got nothing to do with Lincoln or Roosevelt. It's got everything to do with indigenous institutions, ways of knowing. I left Philadelphia. Last major thing I want to mention. I left Philadelphia, rushing back here. Got to Howard's campus. The African Student Association pageants begin. Congratulations to the new Mr. and Ms. Afrique. 6 contestants from people from all over. Even one child had one parent from Congo, one from somewhere else. It was the brother who won, young brother is from Senegal. The sister who won, she's Nigerian. I mean, all kind of countries. I would say out of those several hundred students, probably 2/3 of them were children of Nigerians. But everybody was represented though. All these countries, South Africa, all these countries, Central Africa. It was beautiful. East Africa as well. And all of the music, because I am a dinosaur. Some of y'all know the music. They're playing music every break. All the contestants, a 3-hour pageant. Everybody, they're playing this beautiful. The music, the rhythms are going there. But this ain't Fela. This ain't even Sheun Kuti. That ain't even his son. It's the next generation. And I'm sitting there with Shazam because I got to tally up all the judges' votes. I got to tally all the ballots to give them the number as to who won and who didn't. So I'm just waiting for the ballots to come. But while I'm in it, and I'm Shazam. I don't know none of these songs. And I understood why. There was a category of songs they were singing that were church songs. They all knew the words. They singing it, ah, my God is an awesome God. I'm like, okay, that I recognize, because that version of it is the cultural meaning making of the Kurt Franklins and the Ty Triplets. And all. I mean, I understand that. I get that. Then there's another category, the larger category. This is a song with the kind of Afrobeat suggested hint through the cultural meaning making, but it's more it's more contemporary. As I realize, these are all songs that have been recorded in the last year, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe. These are new songs. And when I tell you the glorious investment in clothing, I have a lot of African clothes, but my God, I can't keep up with these kids. I mean, they had all kinds of stuff, the European cut style suits with the African clothes. The sisters had wardrobe changes. The MC changed wardrobes about 5 times. Young Ghanaian cat. He came out with a kente wrap and some gold slippers. Look like the Asantahini. I'm like, my God, it's a beautiful thing. But they were talking about the diaspora. But when they were talking about diaspora, they were talking about the children and the parents who came directly from Africa here in the last generation or two, including them. And we're talking about me. But I know it wasn't malicious. I know it wasn't intentional. Why? Because I'm the advisor. As I told them, I've been an advisor to the African Student Association 3 times in the last 24 years. Clusters of 3 or 4 years at a time, including this last time they asked me a few years ago, and I'm very happy to do it. I'm honored to do it because you are looking at me. I am your uncle, except my people got taken. So for you to ask me to be your advisor, that means a great deal to me. Even as I hear you talking about the relationship obliquely, one young contestant said, I'm bringing the concept of Sankofa in my platform. I'm not talking about that place on Georgia Avenue, God forbid. And then some people started laughing. I'm thinking, ooh, that's not good. But I understand. You don't mean no harm by it. Your notion of Pan-Africanism is a literal geographical Pan-Africanism, and we can work on that. In fact, I work on it every day. I understand that. But then here's where the thing got fascinating to me. There are some elders there, even as one of the contestants. Oh my God, we laughed so hard. This child looked at the other sisters who were running. There were 3 sisters, 3 brothers. And she looked and said, okay, I'm the youngest here on stage, and these aunties are going to have to understand. When she said aunties, everybody, ooh, because you call somebody auntie, that's an elder, right? I'm like, man, the shade is delicious. But there were some elders there, the judges, myself, we would see, we all there. And there were some Ethiopian elders there. As the pageant unfolded and the skits unfolded and the breaks in between, they had this group of models came out. Oh my God. I'm looking at the ceiling really, because these are my students. I recognize y'all. I'm saying, but you don't have any, well. And I'm looking at these Ethiopian sisters across the way, and they kind of like. Then next to last, the last round was about to come. Before that, they had a performance from some students in the ASA from Ethiopia. Maybe a couple of dozen, maybe close to a couple of dozen, maybe 20. It was a bunch of them. Equal number, just about an equal number of boys and girls, young men and young women in the dress, Ethiopian dress, the kind of light cloth, white cloth, the light fabric with the colors of Ethiopia stitched in, usually in lines, strips, this kind of thing around the collar. Beautiful. And they did this dance to music. That dance was strikingly and markedly different. It was communal. The music was of an older vintage, and it was unlike anything else that had been done by these beautiful young African students from all over the continent before that moment. And I'm looking at the elders now, the Ethiopian, they're smiling, they're clapping, and it's beautiful. So after it was over, the next day I'm talking with an Ethiopian brother. The brother said, I explained to him what I had seen, what we had seen. And he said, well, you have to understand, we were never colonized. Now, every Ethiopian in the world going to say that. They were never colonized. Okay, we ain't going to quibble that point. Because in many ways they weren't. In some ways they probably were. But it's okay. It's myth making, and I'm here for it. Battle of Ottawa, 1897, the Italo-Ethiopian War, 1935 to 1941, Haile Selassie and the whole birth of Rastafarianism grounded in this notion that there was one place on the continent. We don't need Wakanda. We have Ethiopia. We have the whole continent, but Ethiopia stands in Abyssinia. And we talked about that, how the whole African world, which I like to use the phrase the African world now instead of diaspora, the African world, because the word Akata, which is often used to call Africans the diaspora, particularly Africans from the United States, I say I embrace Akata. There's a global Akata. It is alive and rampant in Nigeria. It is alive and rampant. But at any rate, he says we were never colonized. Okay. But then he went on to explain. He said those songs you heard and those movements, those are very old. Those young people are initiated into something which centers that kind of what I would call movement and memory. In other words, cultural meaning making takes place in a moment. The gospel songs, the new vintage stuff, I don't care where it was. Movement and memory requires you to go back into your memory, go back into the Jolly tradition that we heard Al Hassan talk about, that ignited the passion of his students, goes into this notion of this is how we move through the world collectively. And it was so beautiful, this commitment to redouble our work and be clear, to tease out conversations that reframe our work, and between now and Kwanzaa, to think about examples from our memory for that framework, for that thrust. I've learned that repetition is the key, and we're going to repeat a lot and access the archive and do all that together. I'm going to mention a couple of books, Prof, but we're done for our time. Some folks get some, hopefully y'all not out at the store shopping and fighting and don't get no fist fight at the store between now and then. So
2 hours to get some cornbread mix.
Wait, you're not out in them streets, are you, Prof?
I was out in them streets.
Lord, I see it all over your face. You was that what it was?
Too many people.
Too many people.
Y'all wait till the last damn minute. All of you wait to the last minute.
Lord, it wasn't Jiffy, was it?
Yes.
Oh Lord, that Jiffy. We lived off Jiffy in graduate school.
That's all that. I mean, is there cornbread that's not Jiffy?
My God, you about to set off a whole thing. Look, we getting ready to go, and you about to set off a whole. We about to talk about Jiffy Monday night.
I know some of y'all, from scratch with all of the ingredients, but Jiffy got everything. You just got to add an egg and some milk. Well, I'm using oat milk, so I hope they don't notice.
Jiffy, the crack of cornbread.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how much sugar is in this Jiffy? I don't understand. Lord. We look when we were.
Damn, I didn't even look at the ingredients. All right.
We were so poor in grad school that we used to call ourselves going vegetarian, and Jiffy was the excuse. I'm a vegetarian. What you eat? Jiffy? Oh, Jiffy. That's just your vegetarian.
I love it. All right. So what are the books?
Very, very quickly, I was reading actually another book completely unrelated, and I came across the name of someone I'm embarrassed to say that I did not know, although I knew his comrade, because his comrade left a memoir, and there's some history on him. Pio Gama Pinto. You may have heard his name before. East African. He was in the Kenya African Union. That's Jomo Kenyatta. Pio Gama Pinto, contemporary of Malcolm X, Amilcar Cabral, so many others. Well, his friend was Joseph Morumbi. Joseph Morumbi became a very important person in the Kenyan government. He was eventually named Minister of State for Foreign Affairs in the administration of the first Prime Minister of independent Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. This is his memoir. I sent off for it, and I finally got it. I think maybe day before yesterday. Joseph Morumbi, A Legacy of Integrity. Morumbi was high up in the government. Morumbi had the biggest collection of books and art on the continent of Africa, owned by an African, and he bequeathed the entire thing to help start the Kenya National Archives. I read that online in another book, and then started tracing down, see if I could find anything on Joseph Morumbi. And sure enough, Karen Rothmeyer wrote a book called Joseph Morumbi, Legacy of Integrity. Here he is in his library. I think they say between 6,000 and 7,000 books, and then not counting the art. He's buried near the archive that was developed. Came out in 2018. If you look for this, it's going to take you some time. This is an illustration in one of his art books. This is from the Nok culture in what is now Nigeria, 500 BC. So we're talking about 2,500 years ago. Don't bother looking for Greece or Rome, but very interesting. This, of course, the famous one of the famous carvings we see out of West Africa, Morumbi. But anyway, that's one book, and I'll be spending some time with that. And I've been hunting over the past few days, and hopefully I'll spend some time. I don't know that I'm gonna have the energy, or even, well, I always want to go, but I have to get to New York. If you're in New York, if you're in New York or even near New York, anytime soon, there is a new exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Flight into Egypt, Black Artists in Ancient Egypt, 1876 to now. It's just open, and I got to get up there and see it. I imagine it'll be the same time I go to see the exhibit at the J.P. Morgan Library for our sister Belle DaCosta Green. So let me see. Yeah. So this is the Belle DaCosta Green exhibition catalog. Of course, the librarian, the sister African person who was the librarian for J.P. Morgan, who built that incredible collection. And I've told y'all that story before. You can look in the archive for that. But this exhibition catalog just dropped this week. It's only Wednesday. Flight into Egypt. This is the exhibition catalog for the Met exhibit. Black Artists in Ancient Egypt, 1876 to now. Flight into Egypt. It is a beautiful compendium of images. Fred Wilson, the artist, has an artist statement. They have a lot of artists in here. Barbara Chase Ribaud, my man Charles Blockson's friend, the great artist and writer. Solange Knowles got a piece in here. Erykah Badu has a piece in here. Very interesting. But I'm just going to show you two. Well, three that come. Let me see. Yeah, because what this is an exhibition catalog. So you see some things that are on display. They have a page from Ebony Magazine talking about the great William Leo Hansberry. Shout out to the William Leo Hansberry Society, which is, of course, Deborah Hurd, Dr. Deborah Hurd, Professor Deborah Hurd, rather, Dr. Mario Beatty, so many other people who are part of the William Leo Hansberry Society. Brother Hansberry, his daughter, Mama Gail, here, and her sister here in Washington, D.C. Gail Hansberry still swinging with both fists. And this is a page from the February 1961 issue of Ebony Magazine called an essay called "The Scholar Nobody Knows." William Leo Hansberry. It starts with, for more than 40 of his 66 years, Howard University professor William Leo Hansberry has pursued a lonely study of Africa's history from the dawn of mankind to the coming of Europeans in modern times. He has done it with that can't stop now kind of zeal, which broken old gold prospectors go to their graves with about as much encouragement as they get in keeping of the long vigil. Hansberry, a titan. Hansberry, nothing named for him at Harvard University. He doesn't have a PhD because when he went to study classical Africa at Harvard, they told him, we can't give you a PhD because you know more than every member of the faculty who does this work. So it's no sense in you even coming. William Hansberry, who came out of Mississippi, who read as a young man Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois's 1915 book, The Negro, and was so overcome with Du Bois's philosophy of history from the origin of humanity to now that he literally made his way to Harvard, went to the library looking for the sources that Du Bois had written about in the Negro so he could read them for himself, and only realized when the librarian came and said, "Sir, young man, you got to leave. We're closing the library." Only then did he realize he didn't even have a place to stay. This was William Leo Hansberry. By the time he retired, was the chief, most advanced scholar of Africana, classical Africa in the United States of America, and one of the most learned scholars in the world, particularly on the subject of Ethiopia. The Scholar Nobody Knows, 1961. Oh, but the momentum of memory can be unblocked, particularly in this age of chaos. Here's another image. Of all the tours to Kemet, they have an image in the exhibit from my man Ashra and my sister Mary Ra Kwesi. Ashra and Mary Ra Kwesi. We run into them sometime in the Nile Valley. By the way, the information has dropped. If you're interested in going to Kemet, first 2 weeks of August, that information has been posted in Nubia. If you're watching this later on the YouTube side, we're going to post that as well. In fact, if I'm in there on Saturday and link, I will post it as well. And then, we want you all to come, because the convening there is an extension of the work here, is a connection in the momentum of memory of decades of work. And in the exhibit, they got one of the exhibition, one of the study tour flyers here. By the way, Paul Coates and Anthony Browder, who does one of the tours. Paul went with us one year. In fact, Paul and Roz. In fact, Paul proposed to his wife, his now wife, Roz, in the chamber of the Great Pyramid. Paul Coates got to tell you that story one day. I can't remember how he proposed to her. But at any rate, it's funny that they have that in. And the last one I will show you is from the convening on African people connected to Egypt. Here's Gordon Parks from Harlem. Here's a young brother right here. Behind him is Sekhmet. Behind these young people looking with this older man here. They're looking at Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is the statue they're looking at. Behind them is Sekhmet. And then they start talking about all these African organizations, what we would call governance formations that go back to ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptian Arabic order, nobles, mystic. Let me see. You see the Shriner hat, the daughters of Isis, the gloves of the daughters of Isis, and the one I'm going to end with today. There's the reason why I joined Alpha Phi Alpha when I was in there the summer of 1983 after band practice in the summer, hot and sweaty, and my man Carl Batson wanted to be a Sigma, and him and his boys is up in Tennessee State Archives. And we ain't forgot about Tennessee State, Jason Mumpower, you punk. You're not going to get the downtown campus, you MAGA punk. Anyway, we were up in the library. They asking for the Sigma book. They all crowded around that book. And I saw this image on the cover of the Alpha book, because Alpha is organized around ancient Egypt for its symbols. And I said, what is that one? Let me see that one. And when I pulled it down and saw Du Bois and Paul Robeson and Duke Ellington and Jesse Owens, and I saw Martin Luther King and Rayford Logan and Charles Wesley and Charles Hamilton Houston, and I asked the simple question, are these guys in all these books? And they told me, no, you can only be in one. Well, that closed the deal for me, but it was the Sphinx. And that is on display in Flight into Egypt at the Met. So I hope everybody gets a chance to go see that.
Also, as many of you will see this on Saturday, I just want to remind folk that that is the 100th birthday of Shirley Chisholm, and episode 23 of In Class with Carr. We prophetically or ironically had a title before Kamala. There was Shirley Chisholm. This was 4 years ago.
Wow.
That so.
Oh, hey, look, this thing.
Weird.
Thank you, Prof. That arc, that bibliography, that living is a work of art. We can do it. So I'm gonna spend some time. Oh, wow.
And let me just say again, that's not something that came from me. So again, we convene so that we can be sparked. And I love the fact that people are deputized to go and create in here. You know, so many people have stepped up. You know, in the beginning was, you know, Cheryl and others, you know, it's just
Cheryl
now, you know, Ahmad is just, and again, Ahmad came during In Class with Carr uninvited. Okay. And now he's central, you know, so it's but
well, not directly. He was invited by the welcoming, the generosity of spirit, right?
Correct. Well, I mean, I'm saying, but this is the edict, right? A lot of us sit and wait for somebody to do it. That somebody could be you. So
how about that?
As Marcus Garvey, get up and do. I just talked to Dr. Garvey, Julius Garvey this week as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he was on the show promoting a book that Ta-Nehisi actually did the forward for all of these threads that we're entangled with. But yeah.
And by the way, Joe Biden, hey man, pardon Marcus Garvey on the way out. What
correct.
Come on. You know what I'm saying? It's easy. It's easy. That's and those of us in Nubia who may have an end to the White House, I'm gonna call Adjua. You know, it just occurred to me. I'm gonna call Adjua. Somebody tell Joe Biden, that's easy, man. That's low-hanging fruit. Go ahead.
And it'll piss people off.
Oh, no question.
2 for 1. Let's go.
Look, and let Kamala Harris, whose daddy's from Jamaica, get to talk after you do it. Oh, stick that. That would be. Oh.
Yes.
Anyway,
well, listen. Happy solitude and peace.
Happy solitude and peace.
Happy Thanksgiving and Friendsgiving to everybody else.
I love it. Thanksgiving. I love it. Oh, wait. Oh, my God. Dorian Oyelauren said, I remember trips to his office at Obafemi Oluwo University. I was born and raised at university. Shirley Chisholm Day is on the 30th of this month. Didn't know that. This is Loretta.
It makes sense. It's her birthday. So, yeah.
All right. Well, anyway. All right. Listen. Thank you. Love you. Y'all be safe out here in these streets. People are crazy. And just, you know, we'll see each other next week. See each other office hours on Monday.
Yes.
Love you.
Love you too. Bye, y'all.